I sank to the hardwood floor of my childhood living room, legs crossed and stiff from the cold, surrounded by a battlefield of torn wrapping paper and the faint, overpowering scent of artificial pine. The holiday lights twinkled above, reflecting in the ornaments with an almost cruel mockery, like tiny spotlights on the misery of my own overlooked existence. Today should have felt warm, should have felt special. But the air was thick with anticipation for everyone but me. Across the room, my younger sister Lila twirled a set of keys in her perfectly manicured fingers, the metal catching the soft glow of the Christmas lights. She spun, pirouetting like a teenager in a high school musical, not the 31-year-old professional she had become. I froze, heart thumping, disbelief clawing its way up my throat. She squealed, bouncing on, the balls of her feet like a child who had just glimpsed the first snow of the season. "My very own car," she chirped, her voice a melody that seemed to mock me. Dad beamed at her, pride dripping from every line of his face. Mom clasped her hands beneath her chin, eyes shining as though she were witnessing a miracle. The car gleamed in the driveway, a pristine white sedan adorned with a red bow so enormous it seemed to swallow the entire front of the house. I could almost feel the unspoken message pressing down on me. This is what mattered. This is who deserved love and celebration. Meanwhile, in my lap, I held a small plastic piggy bank shaped like a cartoon raccoon. Something I had outgrown decades ago, something that probably belonged more in a dollar store bin than under the raw Christmas tree of a family who had always favored someone else. A price tag dangled from the raccoon's stubby ear, reading $1.99. I had to swallow hard to keep from laughing or crying at the absurdity. "Go on, honey," Mom said, her voice cheerful, gesturing toward the tiny rubber stopper on the bottom. "Open it." My fingers felt frozen as I pulled out 2 crisp $1 bills. "Here's the start of your future fund," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "You're always so responsible with money, not like some people." He winked at Lila. She rolled her eyes as though offended, but the smile on her face said otherwise. And there it was again, the silence between me and the people who were supposed to love me most, stretched taut like a rubber band ready to snap. Mom tried to fill it with words about Lila needing transportation for her graphic design clients, about appearances and professional image, but the words barely registered. They were irrelevant. Lila plopped down beside me on the couch, the expensive swirl of her perfume wrapping around me like an invisible cage. "Don't worry," she said sweetly, her hand lightly patting my knee, a patronizing touch I felt deep in my bones. "I'll drive you around whenever you need. Your little car must be on its last legs by now." The little car had been my companion through college, through first jobs, through the trials that had defined who I was. It was reliable. It had earned every mile and every memory. And yet, here I was, invisible, forgotten, overshadowed by Lila's entitled glow. I couldn't breathe. 31 years of moments like this, the subtle favoritism, the quiet dismissals, the unspoken comparisons, crystallized into one sharp, cold clarity. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a recurring story that had followed me from childhood into adulthood. Earlier that morning, I had wrapped gifts with care. A leather briefcase for Dad, a delicate silver bracelet for Mom, and the camera lens Lila had mentioned casually months ago. Each gift had been bought with money I had saved myself, earned through hours of work, planning, and dedication. I had rehearsed my announcement on the drive down from Seattle. Senior structural engineer, I earned a promotion. Look at me. Appreciate me. I had imagined their faces lighting up with pride, finally seeing me for who I really was. Instead, I watched Lila twirl and squeal, her laughter echoing like a knife in my chest. I placed the raccoon on the coffee table. Its hollow plastic sound against the glass mirrored the hollowness I felt inside. "Excuse me," I said, my voice foreign to my own ears. "Bathroom." I walked, no, ran, not because of urgency, but because I needed to escape the scene that had been repeated countless times. Up the familiar stairs, past walls lined with family photos where Lila's face dominated every frame. I closed the bathroom door behind me. My reflection stared back. Eyes, too dry, face too composed. Palms pressed against cold marble, waiting for tears that never came. Instead, a pressure built in my chest, heavy and relentless, like concrete hardening around my lungs. Heartbreak wasn't abstract. It wasn't a story. It was every cell in my body contracting, blood struggling to push through vessels that seemed to constrict under the weight of years of neglect. My sternum ached. This wasn't dramatic. It was diminishing. The night stretched endlessly as I lay awake, listening to Lila's laughter from downstairs, her parents doting over her, planning trips, celebrating her existence while mine seemed inconsequential. And then, finally, clarity. I packed only what mattered. A faded stuffed bear from my grandmother, a photo album from college, the wooden box containing my first professional blueprint. Everything else, the gifts, the things I had painstakingly chosen for them over the years, stayed behind. They had never been about gratitude anyway. Carrying my suitcase down the silent staircase, I felt the cool metal of my house key in my palm. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker, my symbolic declaration that I was making my choice now. Streetlights blurred into watery halos as I drove away, the snow thickening against my windshield, the radio playing a melancholy Christmas song I quickly silenced. For the first time, I realized that the love I had sought for years wasn't coming. It wasn't waiting, and it never would, at least not in the way I had hoped. I was leaving behind not just a house, not just a holiday morning, but decades of invisible neglect. The raccoon piggy bank, the tiny $1 bills, the hollow sounds on the coffee table. They weren't just gifts. They were a stark, painful reminder of what I had been worth in the eyes of the people who should have cherished me most. And as my Toyota fought against the icy roads, I made a silent vow. No longer would I be invisible. No longer would I allow the patterns of the past to dictate my worth. I was leaving but not running. I was walking toward myself. The tires crunched over frost-hardened gravel, a sound that somehow felt louder than any conversation in that house. I gripped the steering wheel like it was a lifeline, knuckles white, heart pounding a rhythm I couldn't control. Each turn of the key, each press of the pedal was deliberate, as though the act of moving forward could erase years of being overlooked. The streetlights blurred past in slow streaks, casting long shadows across the dashboard. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the house, Lila twirling in the glow of her Christmas lights, my parents smiling indulgently at her joy. But the reflection held only me, silent, solitary, and resolute. The tiny raccoon, piggy bank, which had once been a cruel reminder of my insignificance, sat on the passenger seat. I reached over and touched it gently. Somehow, it no longer felt like a mockery. It felt like proof that I had survived the invisible battles of my past. I remembered the exact moment I decided to leave. It wasn't a loud confrontation or a dramatic outburst. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but as decisive as a hammer striking an anvil. I realized I had spent too many years waiting for acknowledgement that would never come. I had arranged gifts with precision, planned holidays around smiles that were always slightly delayed, and measured my worth by the faint glimmer of attention that flickered only occasionally. And yet, every Christmas, every birthday, it was the same story. Someone else celebrated, someone else shined, and I faded into the background. The first mile out of town was the hardest. Familiar sights, our old bakery, the park where I had learned to ride a bike, the bridge where I had first kissed a girl, flashed past the windshield. Memories tugged at me, sweet and sharp. as though each one was trying to convince me to turn back. But I didn't. I tightened my grip, inhaled the cold, crisp air through the slightly open window, and told myself, this is for me. I deserve to be seen, even if no one else notices. Driving through the quiet, snow-dusted streets, I began to feel the layers of years peeling off. The careful smiles I had worn like masks, the words left unsaid for fear of upsetting the balance. At home, the constant comparison to Lila, they all began to fall away, leaving behind something raw but real. I was frightened, yes, but more than that, I was aware. I was awake to the truth of my own life, and that awareness was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but the destination didn't matter, yet. It was the act of leaving that mattered, the breaking of a pattern that had held me captive far too long. Each mile I drove felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been quietly stolen, piece by piece, over decades. And with every mile, the silent vow I had made that morning grew stronger. No longer invisible, no longer overlooked, no longer waiting for validation that would never come. The radio crackled, then fell silent, leaving only the sound of the engine and my own breathing. It was a strange comfort. For the first time in years, I didn't have to compete for attention, didn't have to soften my voice or my presence to make others comfortable. The silence was mine, and in that silence, I felt the first sparks of freedom. Memories of the morning scene, the twirling keys, Lila's laughter, the tiny plastic raccoon, rose again. But now, instead of sharp pangs of jealousy and hurt, they felt like markers, signposts pointing to why I had to leave. They reminded me that I had always been capable, intelligent, responsible, and yet unseen. If leaving was the only way to claim recognition, to carve out a life that mattered, then so be it. The highway opened before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the white landscape. I pressed the pedal down, the car responding like a loyal companion. Each passing mile was a step further from invisibility, a step closer to self-respect, to autonomy, to recognition of my own worth. The feeling was intoxicating, almost like I had been submerged underwater for years and was finally breaking the surface, gasping for air that was entirely my own. And then it hit me. Leaving wasn't just about escape, it was about possibility. For the first time, I realized that I could define my life on my own terms. I could chase opportunities, build relationships, and celebrate milestones without waiting for anyone's permission or approval. Every choice, every plan, every step forward was mine to make. The thought was dizzying, exhilarating, and frightening, all at once. I thought about the Christmas lights, the fake joy I had been surrounded by just an hour ago. They seemed distant now, fragile illusions that couldn't reach me where I was going. I smiled, a small, private smile that no one could see, and whispered to myself, "This is the start of something real." The snow began to fall heavier, soft flakes dotting the windshield. I slowed down for a moment, watching the world change under a blanket of white, and for the first time I felt a sense of peace. Leaving wasn't a betrayal, nor a retreat. It was a declaration. I mattered. I was worthy. And I was finally taking the first step toward a life that reflected that truth. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and I didn't need to. Today, I had made the most important decision of my life. Today, I had chosen myself. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a silver ribbon cutting through the soft morning light. The car hummed steadily, a comforting sound against the quiet world outside. I leaned back in my seat, letting the engine's steady rhythm match the beating of my heart. After leaving the house, after stepping away from all that I had known, the world felt strange and new, but it also felt alive, full of possibility and promise. I stared out the window as the scenery changed. The familiar streets of my town gave way to open fields, forests, and small towns I had never visited. Everything seemed brighter somehow, not because the sun was stronger, but because my eyes were seeing clearly for the first time. I realized I had spent so many years living in the shadows of others, walking carefully to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. Now, with every mile, I was learning to walk freely, to take up space without apology. At first, the quiet inside the car was unsettling. My thoughts bounced around, chaotic and loud. I thought of Lila, smiling brightly, the way she had always seemed to get attention without trying. I thought of my parents, their polite but distant smiles, the way they had never really noticed the small victories I achieved. And I thought of myself, the years of waiting, of hoping, of giving my all, and receiving so little in return. But slowly, my thoughts began to settle. I started asking myself questions I had never allowed before. What do I really want? Who am I when no one is watching? What makes me happy, truly happy? The answers weren't clear yet, but the act of asking felt powerful. It felt like the first real step toward understanding myself, not as a shadow of someone else's expectations, but as a person with my own dreams and desires. I remembered the small raccoon piggy bank I had taken with me. It sat quietly on the seat beside me, a reminder of the past but also a symbol of survival. I laughed quietly to myself, realizing that something so simple could carry so much meaning. I had learned to find value in myself, even when no one else seemed to see it. And now, as I drove further from the life I had known, I felt that value, growing stronger with every mile. The landscape changed again, rolling hills giving way to dense forests. Snow began to fall softly, blanketing the world in white. It was beautiful, serene, almost magical. I thought about how life can sometimes feel like that snow, cold and quiet at first, but also full of potential. Each flake, unique and delicate, reminded me that every small moment, every choice, mattered. As I drove, memories came flooding back, some painful, some joyful. I remembered staying up late studying while others laughed and played, trying to do my best in a world that rarely noticed. I remembered small victories, finishing a difficult project, helping a friend, learning something new. These memories were no longer just reminders of being overlooked. They were proof of my resilience, my intelligence, my strength. I had survived and I had grown, even when no one applauded. I thought about my parents again. I realized that leaving was not about punishing them or running away from them. It was about protecting myself and choosing to live a life that mattered to me. I could forgive them, even if they never fully understood me. And I could finally step into the life I wanted without waiting for their approval. That realization felt freeing. The journey wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about discovering who I could be. I thought about the dreams I had buried, traveling, learning new skills, meeting new people, building something of my own. For the first time, these dreams felt possible. They didn't feel like distant fantasies that belonged to someone else. They felt like my own. And with that feeling came a new kind of excitement, a sense of purpose that I had never known before. Hours passed, and the snowstorm grew heavier. The car felt small, but I didn't feel trapped. I felt alive. I thought about the people I would meet, the places I would see, the life I would build. Each thought made me smile. Each vision of the future made me feel lighter, as if a weight I hadn't known I carried was finally lifting. At one point, I stopped at a small roadside cafe. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air, warm and inviting. I sat at a corner table, watching snowflakes dance outside the window. I realized that this was more than a rest stop. It was a moment to pause and reflect. I wrote down a few thoughts in my notebook. My goals, my fears, the things I wanted to remember. Writing made everything clearer. It reminded me that my journey wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. I was learning to understand myself, to listen to my own voice, to trust my own instincts. After the cafe, I got back on the road. The snow had slowed, the world was quiet, and I felt a sense of calm determination. I realized that this journey, like life itself, would have obstacles. There would be storms, there would be moments of doubt, there would be times when I felt alone. But I also realized that I had the strength to face them. I had survived the storms of the past. I could face the ones ahead. As the day turned to evening, the sky painted itself in shades of pink and orange. The mountains in the distance glowed softly in the fading light. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for what I had left behind, but for the chance to create something new. I understood that the journey was not just about reaching a destination. It was about learning, growing, and discovering who I was meant to be. And in that quiet, snowy evening, with the car moving steadily forward, I smiled. I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them yet. I only knew that I had chosen myself, and that was the most important step of all. The road stretched on, long and uncertain, but for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt alive. The morning sunlight spilled across the small apartment I had rented, turning the plain walls golden. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread from the cafe downstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, sipping slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my body. This was the first morning in a long time that I didn't wake up feeling like I belonged somewhere I didn't. It was the first morning I truly felt like I belonged to myself. The first few days were harder than I expected. Simple things, finding groceries, paying bills, learning the bus routes, suddenly felt monumental. I laughed quietly at myself when I got lost on my way to the supermarket, wandering in circles while snow dusted the streets outside. But each mistake taught me something. Each misstep, no matter how small, felt like a victory when I realized I could handle it. I was learning to rely on myself in a way I never had before. The apartment was tiny, but it felt like a palace to me. I arranged my few belongings with care. The raccoon piggy bank sat on the windowsill, smiling silently as if it understood that this was the start of something new. I hung a small map on the wall, marking the places I wanted to visit. Every small act of organizing, of creating a space for myself, made me feel stronger. It was like planting seeds. I didn't know which would bloom, but I was finally planting them. I began looking for work, sending out resumes and visiting local businesses. The first rejection hit harder than I expected. I sat in a small cafe afterward, staring out the window at the falling snow, feeling a mix of disappointment and doubt. But then I remembered the long drive, the endless road, and the choices I had made for myself. I had left the familiar because I believed in the possibility of a better life. If I gave up now, I would be letting that belief slip away. So I picked myself up and tried again. It wasn't easy. The jobs were low-paying, sometimes physically demanding, and often thankless. But each small success felt monumental. I remembered my first paycheck. Holding that slip of paper, I realized it wasn't just money, it was proof that I could survive and thrive on my own. I bought a small treat for myself, a simple pastry from the bakery, and savored it slowly. The taste felt like freedom. I also began meeting new people. At first, it was awkward, trying to make conversation in a city where no one knew my past. But I discovered that kindness often travels in small gestures. A smile from a neighbor, a helpful cashier, a colleague offering advice. Slowly, I started forming connections. I realized that community didn't have to be something you were born into. It could be something you built, step by step. Some nights, I still felt lonely. The quiet apartment could feel heavy, and memories of home sometimes made my chest ache. But those moments didn't break me. They reminded me of how far I had come. I began journaling, writing down every thought, every fear, every tiny victory. Reading my own words back, I saw growth I hadn't recognized before. I was learning not only to survive, but to thrive. One of the biggest challenges came when I tried to manage my finances. I had never truly handled money on my own. Balancing rent, groceries, transport, and little luxuries felt like a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. I made mistakes, of course, forgetting to pay a bill, overspending on a book I couldn't resist, but each error taught me a lesson. Slowly, I began to master this adult skill, and each successful month gave me confidence. There were also moments of joy I hadn't anticipated. I discovered a small park nearby where I could walk and breathe freely. I learned the names of the local cafes and the best bread in town. I even found a small bookstore tucked between two tall buildings, its shelves crowded and chaotic, smelling of old paper and possibilities. These small discoveries made life feel like an adventure. Every new experience became a reminder that I had chosen this path, and it was worth it. One afternoon, while walking home from work, I passed a group of children playing soccer in the street. Their laughter echoed in the quiet neighborhood, and I realized I hadn't felt so lighthearted in years. I smiled to myself, thinking about how life, even with its struggles, could still surprise me with joy. It was a lesson I was learning slowly. Happiness often arrived in small moments, not grand gestures. By the end of the month, I had begun to settle into a rhythm. I wasn't rich, and life wasn't perfect, but I had begun to carve a space for myself in the world. I could cook my own meals, pay my bills on time, and even enjoy a quiet evening with a book or music without feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Each small triumph, no matter how insignificant it seemed, was a brick in the foundation of my independence. Looking back, I realized these early steps were about more than just survival. They were about building courage, discovering resilience, and learning to trust myself. I understood that life wouldn't always be easy, but the first steps I had taken showed me that I could face challenges head-on. Every morning I woke up and faced the world. I felt a little stronger, a little braver, a little more alive. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, I felt a sense of pride. I had started to create a life. That was mine, shaped by my choices, my efforts, and my dreams. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I believed in my ability to walk it, step by step, with courage and hope. It was a chilly morning, the kind where your breath forms small clouds in the air and the city feels almost magical under a pale sun. I walked quickly down the familiar streets, my bag slung over my shoulder, heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. Months of hard work, mistakes, small victories, and late-night doubts had all led me here. Today wasn't just another day of survival. Today could change everything. I arrived at the office building where I had applied for a position months ago, a place I had almost given up on after repeated rejections. The receptionist greeted me with a smile I didn't fully understand yet, and I was led to a small waiting room. My hands felt clammy, and I tried to calm my racing mind. I remembered the tiny apartment, the lost walks in the snow, the first paycheck, the quiet evenings with a book, all the little steps that had brought me to this moment. When I was finally called in, I met Ms. Reynolds, a sharp-eyed woman with a kind smile and an air of authority. She didn't waste time with small talk. She asked questions about my skills, my goals, my experiences, probing deeper than any interview I had faced before. At first, I stumbled, nerves making my words clumsy. But then I remembered the months of preparation, the times I had doubted myself and still tried anyway. I took a deep breath and spoke honestly, passionately, letting my voice carry the confidence I had built, brick by brick, through all the struggles. By the time the meeting ended, I wasn't sure if I had succeeded. All I could do was leave with my head held high, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. Days passed, each one stretching longer than it should, as I waited for news. Then, one evening, the call came. Ms. Reynolds's voice was calm, professional, but the words she spoke made my heart leap. I had been selected. It felt surreal. I sat down on the edge of my bed, trying to let it sink in. All the late nights, the hard work, the moments of self-doubt, they had led to this. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of recognition, not from family or friends, but from the world outside, acknowledging that my effort, skill, and perseverance mattered. The first days at work were challenging. I was still learning the ropes, adjusting to new responsibilities, and proving myself all over again. But there was a difference now. I felt capable. I felt like someone who could handle setbacks and still push forward. My colleagues started noticing, offering small words of encouragement, sometimes asking for my opinion. Each acknowledgement, no matter how small, boosted my confidence further. The turning point wasn't just about the job itself. It was about believing in my own worth. I realized that recognition comes not just from others, but from the work you do, the effort you put in, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the path seems uncertain. I began taking initiatives, suggesting small improvements, and volunteering for projects. Slowly, my voice carried weight, and my contributions were acknowledged publicly. One afternoon, my manager called me into her office. She handed me a folder and smiled warmly. Inside was a certificate of recognition for my recent project, an acknowledgement of my effort, creativity, and persistence. I held it in my hands, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that I could succeed, that I had earned my place in this world. I left the office that day walking taller, feeling a sense of pride I had never experienced before. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving or making small wins. I was achieving something that mattered, something tangible that validated all the struggles I had endured. I remembered the apartment, the park, the bookstore, the small victories. They had all prepared me for this moment. Recognition brought new opportunities. People began to seek my advice, my opinion mattered more, and doors that had seemed closed for so long began to open. I traveled to new places for meetings, met inspiring individuals, and learned skills I hadn't imagined I would need. Every challenge now felt like a stepping stone, not an obstacle. But what made this turning point truly special wasn't the external acknowledgement. It was the internal transformation. I had learned to trust myself, to push past fear and doubt, and to embrace challenges as opportunities. The journey had taught me resilience, patience, and courage, and now I could see how far I had come. That evening, as I walked home through the same snowy streets I had wandered months ago, I looked at the small apartment, the map on the wall, the raccoon piggy bank smiling silently from the windowsill. Everything had changed, yet everything felt connected. The struggles, the triumphs, the growth, they were all part of the same story. I realized that success wasn't a sudden leap, but a series of steps, each one building upon the last, each one leading to the turning point where recognition and achievement finally met. I smiled to myself, feeling a warmth that no cold wind could touch. Life was no longer just about surviving or proving myself. It was about thriving, creating, and leaving a mark. And in that moment, I knew that this turning point was not the end, but the beginning of something much larger. The world had acknowledged me, but more importantly, I had acknowledged myself.